My name is Avery Vance, and for a long time the only thing I ever wanted to build was buildings. Now I know that sometimes you have to build a fortress around yourself first. Hiver can, and fewer build a fortress around yourself first. If you've ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have someone else try and sign their name at the bottom, and then you know what I'm talking about. And it helps sometimes just to know you're not the only one. So if you're out there, and this sounds familiar, let me know in the comments. It's good to know I'm not just speaking into the void. For 2 years, my world was the Valerius Museum. It wasn't just a project. It was a career, a legacy, a dream rendered in steel, glass, and light. My partner Gideon and I had started our firm Vance and Thorn with the youthful, reckless ambition of two people who believed that good design could change the world. He was the face, the charismatic salesman with a dazzling smile and a firm handshake that could close deals. I was the architect, the engine room, the one who lived in a world of blueprints, stress models, and the quiet hum of a rendering farm at 3 a.m. We were a perfect team, or so I thought. The Valerius was our magnum opus, a 9-figure testament to everything we'd worked for. The design was mine. The soul of it, the impossible cantilevers that seemed to cheat gravity, the way the light would fall through the central atrium like a secular cathedral, that all came from my pen, from my sleepless nights. Gideon sold it. He sold it brilliantly. The day we won the bid was the best day of my life. The phone call came, and the world just stopped. We'd beaten out titans of the industry, old, established firms with pedigrees stretching back a century, but our vision, my vision, had won. We celebrated with champagne that cost more than my first car. Gideon lifted his glass, his eyes shining with what I mistook for shared triumph. He said, "To Avery, the ghost in the machine." I laughed, thinking it was his clumsy, backhanded way of acknowledging my work behind the scenes. I didn't realize he was giving a toast to what he believed I was about to become. The next morning, I walked into the office expecting to see planning boards and to start the frantic, glorious work of turning a design into a reality. Instead, I found a single, thick envelope on my desk. My keycard had already been deactivated. The crisp, formal letter inside, signed by a lawyer I'd never heard of, informed me that Gideon Thorn had invoked a clause in our partnership agreement to dissolve Vance and Thorn, effective immediately. A new entity, Thorn Architecture, had already been formed and had acquired all assets, contracts, and intellectual property of the former partnership. My assets, my contracts, my intellectual property, my personal belongings were in a box by the door. He didn't even have the courage to do it himself. He was already in a meeting, probably telling the Valerius board how he, Gideon Thorn, had single-handedly conceived of their new museum. He thought I was just a junior partner, a talented subordinate he could exploit, and then discard like scaffolding once the real structure was in place. He thought the game was over. What Gideon didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that our client, the eccentric and intensely private benefactor of the museum, Mr. Alistair Sterling, was a man who cared more for integrity than for letterheads. He was a man who saw things others missed, and during one of our final contract meetings, a meeting Gideon had skipped for a more important networking lunch, Mr. Sterling and I had added a private, legally binding addendum, a little secret, just between the person funding the dream and the person who actually dreamt it. It was a single, devastatingly simple clause. Avery Vance must personally oversee every phase of the construction, from foundation to finish. My physical presence on site was a non-negotiable condition of the funding. If I was removed from the project, for any reason, the entire 9-figure capital investment would be immediately and irrevocably pulled. Right now, as I stand here telling you this, Gideon is probably walking into his new, sleek boardroom. He's feeling the thrill of his coup. He's about to pick up the phone to call Mr. Sterling's financial manager for the first major capital draw to break ground. And in about 5 minutes, he's going to discover that his career-defining monument to his own ego is, and will forever remain, nothing more than an empty, worthless lot. It wasn't about revenge. It was about correcting the record. And the record was about to be corrected with the force of a wrecking ball. The drive home from the office that morning is a blur of gray concrete and the flat, indifferent sky of the city. I remember the weight of the box of my personal effects on the passenger seat. It felt heavier than it should have, filled not just with my worn-out coffee mug, a few reference books, and a framed photo of my parents, but with the entire unceremonious weight of my professional life being dismissed. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were bone white, but I felt nothing. It was a strange, hollowed-out shock, the kind that comes after a blast, when the world is silent before the ringing in your ears begins. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove, my mind a blank slate, wiped clean by the sheer clinical brutality of it all. When I got to my apartment, I set the box down by the door and walked to the window. My home, usually a sanctuary of quiet order and soft light, suddenly felt like a stranger's house. I looked out at the city, at the thousands of windows reflecting the afternoon sun, and I felt utterly, completely alone. For 2 years my identity had been fused with the Valerius project. I was Avery, the architect of the Valerius. Now who was I? Just Avery, a name, a person locked out of her own life. That's when the dam finally broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic collapse. It was a silent, internal crumbling. I sank down to the floor, my back against the cool glass of the window, and the hollowness was replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Every memory of the last 2 years began to replay in my mind, but this time they were cast in a new, hideous light. All the little red flags I had so willingly ignored, so casually explained away, now stood up and screamed at me. I remembered the meeting with the City Planning Commission 6 months ago. We were presenting the environmental impact studies. I had spent 3 weeks straight, working with a team of engineers, to solve a complex drainage issue that threatened to derail the entire project. We'd developed an innovative system of bioswales and permeable surfaces that not only met but exceeded the city's requirements. It was elegant, efficient, and entirely my design. In the meeting, when the commission chair praised the solution, Gideon had clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of patronizing ownership, and said, "Thank you. I'm glad my vision for sustainable integration has been so well received." He used the word I remember the faint, metallic taste of disappointment in my mouth, but I had swallowed it. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as the building was built. I was wrong. It always matters. I flashed back to an earlier time, a dinner with potential donors. Gideon was holding court, a glass of red wine in his hand, weaving a grand narrative about the museum's design philosophy. He was magnetic. I had to give him that. He spoke of architectural history, of light and shadow, of community and legacy, and every word he spoke was a beautiful, articulate paraphrasing of conversations he and I had had over late-night takeout in the office. He was quoting my soul back to me and selling it as his own. I had sat there, smiling politely, feeling like a ventriloquist's dummy. A junior colleague from another firm had turned to me and asked, "So what's your role in all this?" Before I could answer, Gideon had laughed and said, "Avery keeps the trains running on time. She's my secret weapon, an absolute wizard with the technical stuff." He'd reduced me to a technician, a project manager. He'd stripped the art from my work and left only the science, because the art was what he wanted to claim for himself, and I had let him. I'd let him because I believed in the project more than I believed in my own need for recognition. That loyalty, I now saw, had been a form of self-betrayal. The memories kept coming, a relentless tide of small humiliations. The magazine interview where he'd referred to me as one of my brightest young architects, conveniently forgetting we were co-founders. The client meetings he'd take alone, only to call me in a panic afterwards, needing me to fix a technical promise he'd made that was nearly impossible to keep. I was the firewall, the fixer, the one who made his grand, careless pronouncements a reality. I was the foundation, and he was the glittering facade, and he'd just dynamited the foundation, expecting the facade to magically remain standing. This is what happens, I thought, my cheek pressed against the cold glass. This is the price of being the quiet one. the one who believes the work will speak for itself. The work never speaks for itself. It needs a voice, and I had willingly handed my voice to Gideon. My mind drifted to Mr. Sterling. The catalyst for all of this wasn't just the work. It was him. Alistair Sterling was a myth in the financial world. He had built a software empire in the 90s, sold it for an astronomical sum, and then simply vanished from public life. He lived on a sprawling, secluded estate, upstate, and communicated with the world almost exclusively through his lawyers and financial managers. He was the kind of client who didn't just fund a project. He curated it. He had a reputation for being exacting, eccentric, and utterly ruthless with anyone who he felt lacked integrity. Getting the Valerius commission meant getting his approval, and that was known to be the hardest part of any deal he was involved in. Our first meeting with him was at his estate. Gideon was in his element, dressed in a tailored suit, his presentation polished to a mirror shine. He strode into Sterling's vast, minimalist library and launched into his pitch. It was a performance. He talked about market impact, about creating a landmark, about the Thorn brand of architectural excellence. I remember watching Mr. Sterling during the entire presentation. He was an older man, gaunt and sharp-eyed, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater. He didn't look at Gideon's glossy presentation boards. He looked at me. His gaze was unnervingly direct, as if he were trying to read the schematics in my head. When Gideon finished, a smug, confident smile on his face, there was a long, heavy silence. Mr. Sterling hadn't asked a single question. Finally, he turned his penetrating gaze away from me and to Gideon. He said, "You speak of landmarks, Mr. Thorn. Landmarks are for tourists. I am interested in building a sanctuary, a place for quiet contemplation. Your presentation is loud." I thanked him for his time, Gideon's smile faltering for the first time. As we were packing up, convinced we had lost it, Mr. Sterling spoke again, his voice softer this time. He said, "Miss Vance, you have been silent this entire time. Do you have nothing to say about your own design?" My heart hammered in my chest. Gideon shot me a look, a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head that said, "Don't blow this,
Ed."
But something in Mr. Sterling's direct, unblinking stare gave me a flicker of courage. I left the presentation boards on the table. I walked over to the large window that overlooked his gardens, which I had noticed were designed with a distinct Japanese influence. Asymmetry, natural materials, a sense of controlled wilderness. I didn't talk about branding or market share. I talked about the north-facing clerestory windows in my design, how they were designed to capture the soft, indirect light that painters love, how they would prevent the damaging effects of direct sun on the canvases. I talked about the acoustics in the central atrium, how the materials were chosen to absorb sound, to create that sense of hushed reverence you feel in a forest. I pointed to his garden. I said, "The flow of the museum is based on the same principles as your garden path. It's not about the most efficient route from A to B. It's about the journey, the curated reveal, the moments of pause and reflection. You don't build a path like that for efficiency. You build it for the soul." Another long silence. Then for the first time, Mr. Sterling smiled, a small, dry, but genuine smile. He said, "You see the building, Mr. Thorn sees the billboard. I will be in touch." That was the moment the seed of this entire disaster was planted. Gideon was furious on the drive back. He accused me of being insubordinate, of grandstanding. But when Mr. Sterling's office called the next day to inform us we had won the project, Gideon's anger evaporated, replaced by a triumphant possessiveness. He saw it not as a validation of my approach, but as proof that his strategy of bringing me along as his technical expert had worked. He had completely, utterly missed the point. He never saw me as his partner. He saw me as his tool. Sitting there on my apartment floor, the full weight of that realization crashed down on me. The despair was a physical thing, a crushing pressure in my chest. For 2 years I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and the man I had trusted as my partner had been the one building the walls of my prison. It felt like the end. But then a new feeling started to burn through the cold dread. It was a slow, quiet heat. It was anger. a clean, clarifying anger. He thought he could erase me. He thought the story of the Valerius Museum would have only one name on it. But he had forgotten about Alistair Sterling. He had forgotten that a man who builds his garden for the soul, not for efficiency, is a man who understands that the architect is not the one with the loudest voice, but the one with the clearest vision. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but I felt a strange new strength solidifying in my core. The despair was receding, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just an injustice, it was a declaration of war. A war Gideon didn't even know he was about to lose. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. The truth was my design, my vision. The truth was my name, and I was going to take it back. I walked over to the box of my belongings, pulled out my laptop and opened it. The fight wasn't over, it had just begun. My resolve hardened not in a single fiery moment, but in a series of quiet, deliberate clicks of a mouse in the dead of night. The anger that had started as a slow burn now fueled me with a cold, clear energy. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, and frankly didn't want. My mind, which for hours had been a maelstrom of shock and betrayal, was now starting to function like the architect it was, assessing the damage, identifying the structural weaknesses of my enemy, and drawing up a new blueprint, a blueprint for my own survival. My first act was not one of aggression, but of preservation. I had always been meticulous about my digital archives. While the primary project files were on the Vance and Thorn servers, now Thorn architecture servers, I had a personal encrypted hard drive where I kept my own process work, every sketch, every discarded draft, every late-night vector drawing, every email thread detailing a design choice. It was my private journal of creation, a habit I'd developed years ago, not out of paranoia, but out of a deep-seated need to document my own thinking. It was thousands of files, a mountain of data that told the true story of the Valerius Museum's genesis. Gideon had the final, polished blueprints. I had the soul. I spent the first night meticulously backing up this drive to a secure cloud server, then duplicating it onto another physical drive that I stored in a bank safe deposit box. The next morning, this wasn't just data, it was my testimony. With my own work secured, my thoughts turned to my greatest and most secret asset, the Sterling addendum. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The foresight to insist on it now seemed less like a stroke of genius and more like an act of profound subconscious self-preservation. It was born from a pattern of behavior I'd observed not just in Gideon, but in the industry as a whole. Architects of my gender were often praised for their detail-oriented work, their collaborative nature, their reliability, all coded language for being good little worker bees, while the visionaries, almost always men, took the credit and the glory. I had seen it happen to mentors and colleagues. I had sworn it would not happen to me. The memory of that meeting with Sterling was now crystal clear. It had taken place 2 weeks before we officially won the bid. Gideon was supposed to be there. He'd canceled at the last minute, claiming a sudden can't-miss lunch with a potential future client. "You can handle the final contract details, Avery," he'd said, his voice slick with condescension. "Just the boring legal stuff. Let me know when it's done." The boring legal stuff. He had no idea. I had arrived at the offices of Sterling's lawyers, a hyper-modern suite of glass and chrome that felt sterile and intimidating. Mr. Sterling was there, which was a surprise. He had greeted me not with a handshake, but with a nod. We sat across a vast mahogany table, the final contract documents spread between us. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, walked me through the standard clauses. Then she paused, looked at her boss, and he gave another slight nod. Miss Davies slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was titled Addendum 11B, Clause of Personal Oversight. It was simple, direct, and written in plain English, not legalese. It stipulated that my personal, on-site supervision was a material condition of the contract. It gave my name, Avery Vance, and my professional license number. It stated that any attempt to remove me, replace me, or otherwise diminish my role as lead architect would constitute a fundamental breach of contract. triggering an immediate and total cessation of all funding from the Sterling Trust. I read it twice, my heart pounding. I looked up at Mr. Sterling. He was studying me with that same intense, analytical gaze from our first meeting. I asked him, why? His answer was quiet, but it landed with the force of a tectonic shift. He said, Miss Vance, I have built and dismantled empires. I have seen brilliant minds yoked to the ambitions of hollow men. I have seen credit takers build careers on the backs of creators. The soul of this building is your soul. I am not investing in a firm. I am not investing in Mr. Thorne's dazzling smile. I am investing in that soul. This addendum is not a leash, it is a shield. It ensures that the person who designed the sanctuary is the one who gets to build it. Do you agree to this? A wave of emotion had washed over me, gratitude so profound it almost brought me to tears. For the first time in my professional life, someone at that level hadn't just seen my work, they had seen me. They had understood the inherent vulnerability of the creator in a world that lionizes the salesman. I had signed it without a moment's hesitation. Miss Davies had produced 2 sealed envelopes. One containing a copy of the addendum was given to me. The other, she explained, would be held in their vault, to be attached to the master contract, only upon its final execution, after the bid was awarded. Gideon would never see it. It was a secret weapon, lying dormant until the day I might need it. And now, that day had come. It was a powerful piece of leverage, but leverage is useless without a plan to apply it. Mr. Sterling had given me a shield, but I had to forge my own sword. My mind shifted to allies. In a coup like Gideon's, the first casualty is loyalty. He was counting on the fact that everyone at the firm was paid by him, that their livelihoods depended on his new entity, Thorne Architecture. But money isn't the only currency. Respect is another, and I had spent years earning it. My thoughts immediately went to Elena. Elena Rivera was a junior architect, a brilliant young woman I had mentored for the past year. She was whip-smart, passionate, and had an uncanny eye for detail. She reminded me of myself a decade ago. Gideon barely knew her name, often referring to her as the girl who does the renderings. But I knew her worth. I knew she'd been frustrated by the office culture, by the way her ideas were often dismissed in meetings only to be repackaged and presented by one of the male senior associates a week later. She had seen the real dynamics of the firm. She had seen who stayed late and who left early for client dinners. I sent her a carefully worded text message from my personal phone. Elena, I know things are chaotic. I hope you land on your feet. You're a brilliant architect and deserve the best. Avery. It was non-committal, offering support without asking for anything. It was a test, a way to open a door without demanding she walk through it. Her reply came within minutes. Avery, what they did is unforgivable. This place is a ghost ship without you. Half the team is updating their resumes. Call me when you can. I have things you might need. The message was a lifeline. Things you might need. That could mean anything, but in our world, it usually meant information. I called her that evening. Her voice was a low, angry whisper. She was still at the office, long after everyone else had left. She told me Gideon had held an all-hands meeting that afternoon. He'd spun a story about me wanting to pursue smaller, more artistic projects, about our amicable decision to go our separate ways. He'd promised promotions, bonuses, a new era of prosperity under his singular, focused leadership. Elena said the mood in the room was sullen. No one believed him. They all knew my work ethic. They knew the Valerius was my baby. She said, he's in over his head, Avery. He's already been on the phone with the structural engineers, and he doesn't understand the load-bearing calculations for the West Cantilever. He was asking them questions you had already answered 6 months ago. He's trying to fake it, but he can't. He doesn't have the blueprint in his head. You do. Then she lowered her voice even more. She said, I made a copy. The full server backup from last night, before they switched everything over to the new Thorne Architecture domain. Project files, client correspondence, billing records, everything. I have it on a drive. It's yours, if you want it. It's not about revenge, Avery. It's about the fact that this whole place feels like a lie now. I felt a surge of validation that was almost as powerful as what I'd felt in Sterling's lawyer's office. I had built more than just buildings at that firm. I had built relationships. I had fostered loyalty, not through power, but through mutual respect. That was a currency Gideon had never bothered to accumulate. I told her to be careful, to not put herself at risk. I told her to hold on to the drive for now. Her loyalty was more valuable than any data, and Shu of Train. The loyalty was more valuable than any data. We made a plan to meet in a few days, discreetly. The final piece of my quiet plan began to form. The Sterling addendum could stop Gideon, but it couldn't build my future. For that, I needed my own firm, an entity, legally and financially separate from the wreckage of my past. The idea was daunting. Starting a firm from scratch is a monumental task. But then I realized I didn't have to start from scratch. A firm isn't a name on a door or a fancy office. It's the talent, it's the relationships, it's the trust of your clients. And Gideon had just handed me an opportunity to walk away with all three. I spent the next 48 hours in a blur of focused activity. I contacted a lawyer, not a flashy corporate shark, but a quiet, methodical woman who specialized in intellectual property and partnership law. I explained the situation, omitting the Sterling addendum for the moment. I wanted to know my legal standing without my trump card on the table. She confirmed what I suspected. Gideon's move was legally aggressive, but likely defensible under the specific predatory clauses he'd had his lawyers bake into our initial partnership agreement. A court battle would be long, expensive, and public. It would be a war of attrition he was better capitalized to win. This confirmed my strategy. I wouldn't fight him in the courts of law, but in the court of competence. With my lawyer's guidance, I incorporated a new firm. I called it Vance Atelier, not Vance and Associates, or Vance Group. Atelier, a workshop, a place where things are made. It was a statement of intent. We were creators, not just a corporation. The registration was filed online, a quiet, digital birth. I set up a business bank account with my own savings. It was a shoestring operation, but it was mine. My strategy was now a three-legged stool. Leg 1, the Sterling addendum, my hidden leverage, the bomb that would vaporize Gideon's cornerstone project. Leg 2, the data, the proof of my work, and the loyalty of key talent like Elena, ready to move when the time was right. Leg 3, Vance Atelier, the vessel, the lifeboat ready to pick up the pieces and sail away from the shipwreck. It was all in place. All the pieces were on the board. All I had to do was wait for Gideon to make his move, to pick up the phone and call Mr. Sterling's people. He thought he was taking the king. He had no idea he was walking his own king directly into a checkmate he couldn't see. And I have to be honest, a part of me was looking forward to the silence on the other end of that phone call. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, the phrase becoming a calming mantra. It was about balance. It was about restoring a natural order that Gideon, in his arrogance, had sought to upend. The world was about to be set right. The day arrived with an almost cinematic sense of inevitability. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, 1 week after my professional execution. According to the project schedule I still knew by heart, today was the day the first major capital draw was to be initiated. 7 figures. The money required to mobilize the excavation crews, to pour the first concrete foundations for a building that, unbeknownst to its supposed new master, would never exist under his name. I didn't go to a war room. I didn't pace in a lawyer's office. I went to a small independent coffee shop with wide windows and the comforting smell of roasting beans. I had my new laptop, a legal pad, and a single manila folder containing my copy of the Sterling addendum. I sat at a small table in the corner, a pot of tea at my elbow, and I began to sketch. Not for a project, not for a client. For myself, I drew impossible structures, buildings that twisted into the sky, houses that floated on water. It was a way of reconnecting with the part of myself that Gideon had tried to commodify and discard. the pure, joyful act of creation. It was my way of staying calm, of centering myself before the storm broke. My phone, lying face down on the table, was my only link to the battlefield. At 9:58 a.m., it vibrated. A text from Elena. He's walking into the conference room. He looks like he just closed the biggest deal of his life. I took a slow sip of my tea. I could picture it perfectly. Gideon, in his perfectly tailored suit, striding into the glass-walled conference room he'd probably already designated as his personal throne room. He would have his finance director with him, a nervous man named Arthur, who I knew was competent, but deeply conflict-averse. Gideon would be radiating smug confidence, the kind of unearned arrogance that is both infuriating and, in this case, profoundly satisfying to imagine. At 10:01 a.m., in another vibration, the call is being placed. He put it on speakerphone. Of course he did. He'd want an audience for his moment of triumph. He'd want Arthur to bear witness to the moment the money started to flow, solidifying his control. Theatrics were always his specialty. I set down my pen and folded my hands around my warm teacup. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene, the hushed conference room, the faint electronic chirp of the call connecting, the polite professional voice of Mr. Sterling's financial manager, a man named Henderson, coming through the speaker. Sterling Trust. Henderson speaking. Gideon's voice would be smooth as silk. "John, good morning. Gideon Thorne here, calling to initiate the first capital draw for the Valerius project, as scheduled." He would lean back in his chair, a king surveying his domain. Then there would be a pause, not a long one, just a few seconds, but in a high-stakes financial call, a pause of even 2 seconds is an eternity. It's a void where confidence goes to die. At 10:03 a.m., my phone vibrated again, a long, sustained buzz this time. It was Elena. I picked it up. She wasn't texting, she was calling. I answered, my voice quiet. "Avery." Her voice was a frantic whisper, crackling with suppressed excitement and shock. "Oh my God, Avery, you have to hear this." She had her phone cupped, and I could hear the tinny, distant sound from the speakerphone in Gideon's office. I heard Henderson's voice, no longer polite and professional, but now cold and sharp as chipped ice. "Mr. Thorne, I'm looking at the file, and I'm afraid there seems to be a misunderstanding." Gideon's voice, a little tighter now, a misunderstanding. "John, the contracts are signed. We won the bid. Thorne Architecture holds all assets and obligations." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in Henderson's methodical brain as he chose his words with surgical precision. "I see a contract with Vance and Thorne." "Yes. And I see a private binding addendum, 11B, which specifies Miss Avery Vance as the irreplaceable lead architect and on-site overseer for the project." Silence. A beautiful, perfect, damning silence from Gideon's end. I could feel his world tilting on its axis. Addendum 11B. A designation he had never heard. A clause he had never seen. The ghost in the machine was suddenly holding the kill switch. Henderson's voice continued, relentless and dispassionate. "The addendum is unequivocal. The Sterling Trust's funding is conditional upon Miss Vance's personal and continuous involvement. Our legal team has been notified of her departure. As per the terms of that addendum, the funding for the Valerius Museum project has been frozen, effective immediately." I could hear a choked sound from the speakerphone, a gasp. It was probably Arthur, the finance director, seeing his entire budget evaporate in real time. Gideon finally found his voice. It was strained, a desperate, blustering attempt to regain control. That's impossible. That's a mistake. I am the principal of this firm. The design is the firm's intellectual property. You can't just—" Henderson cut him off. His tone was now one of pure finality. "Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, Mr. Sterling is not investing in intellectual property. He was investing in a person. That person is no longer associated with your firm. Therefore, our business is concluded. You will receive formal notification from our legal counsel within the hour. Goodbye." The click of the call ending echoed in the silence. Elena's whisper was shaky. "He's just staring at the phone. He's gone completely pale. Arthur looks like he's going to be sick. Avery, what did you do? I took another calm sip of my tea. I didn't do anything, Elena. Gideon did this all to himself. I just made sure the contract reflected the truth. She let out a choked laugh. He's getting up. He just swept everything off the conference table. The papers, the water carafe, everything. It just crashed to the floor. He's screaming. I've never heard him scream like this. I have to go. She hung up. I sat there in the quiet coffee shop, the ambient noise of clinking cups and soft conversation a world away from the chaos unfolding in Gideon's glass fortress. The first move wasn't a move I had to make. It was a trap I had set. A trap that Gideon, in his hubris, had walked directly into. He thought he was starting a construction project. Instead, he had just triggered a demolition. His own. I picked up my pen again. The sketches on my pad seemed more vibrant now, more possible. The silent takeover was complete. The foundation of his new empire had turned to dust before the first shovel ever broke ground. It wasn't about revenge. It was about architecture. And the first rule of architecture is that you can't build a towering skyscraper on a foundation of lies. It will always eventually collapse under its own weight. Gideon's collapse was just happening faster than most. The aftermath of Gideon's disastrous phone call was not a single loud explosion, but a series of quiet, cascading failures. Panic is a contagion, and Gideon had just become patient zero. While he was, according to Elena's discreet updates, either locked in his office making furious unanswered calls or stalking the halls like a caged animal, the shockwaves of his failure were already spreading. My own phone, which had been silent for a week, began to light up. The first call was from Mark Renshaw, a senior project manager for the Callaway Group, a high-end commercial developer. They were one of Gideon's other major clients, with a boutique hotel project in the final design phase. Mark was a no-nonsense engineer who I had always had a good rapport with. We'd spent countless hours together, working through the complex mechanical and electrical plans for the hotel. He got straight to the point. Avery, it's Mark. I just got a bizarre call from Gideon. He was trying to move up our project timeline, demanding a new round of funding. He sounded unhinged. Then, 5 minutes later, I get a call from a colleague at the city planning office, who heard a rumor that the Valerius project just went belly up. What the hell is going on? This was the moment. The power was shifting, and it was shifting toward me, not because I was pulling it, but because Gideon was frantically pushing it away. I didn't lie or dissemble. I was calm, professional, and direct. I said, Mark, there has been a change in the partnership structure. Gideon has taken over the firm. Unfortunately, it seems he was not fully briefed on some critical client agreements. The Valerius project is currently on indefinite hold. There was a long pause on his end. I could hear him processing the information, connecting the dots. His voice was low when he spoke again. He pushed you out. After the Valerius win, he pushed you out. Unbelievable. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact. He'd seen this movie before. He continued, Listen, Avery, you're the only one who understands the geothermal system for our hotel. The design is yours. We signed with Vance and Thorne because of you, not because of Gideon's sales pitch. I need to know, where are you landing? It was the question I had been preparing for. I said, I've established a new independent firm, Vance Atelier. It's small, but it's focused. Mark's response was immediate. Good. I'm putting a stop payment on our last invoice to Thorne Architecture. I'm calling our legal team. We have a key person clause in our contract too. It's not as ironclad as whatever you had with Sterling, but it mentions you by name as lead design architect. Gideon just breached our contract. Send me the details for your new firm. We're moving the project, just like that. The first domino had fallen. It wasn't a matter of poaching a client. It was a matter of the client choosing to follow the architect, not the brand. My relationship with Mark, built on competence and mutual respect over 2 years, was an asset Gideon couldn't list on a balance sheet, and its value was proving to be greater than the entire firm he had just stolen. 2 more calls like that came in before lunch. One from a residential client for whom I'd designed a complex, ambitious home, and another from a nonprofit we were doing pro bono consulting for. The story was the same. Their trust was not in the name on the door. It was in the person who answered their calls at 10 p.m. to solve a problem. It was in me. Meanwhile, Gideon's desperation was escalating. He had finally figured out that his angry calls were getting him nowhere, so he switched tactics. My phone buzzed with a series of text messages from him. The first was almost conciliatory. "Avery, we need to talk. There's been a massive misunderstanding with Sterling. A clerical error. We can fix this." I didn't reply. An hour later, the next message was more demanding. "I know you're talking to my clients. That's tortious interference. My lawyers will be in touch. This is not a game." I screenshotted it and forwarded it to my own lawyer with a simple note. For the file. The final message of the day arrived in the late afternoon. It was pleading. Pathetic. "Avery, please. Call me. Everything we worked for is falling apart. I'll give you anything. Your name back on the door. A bigger percentage. The lead on Valerius. Whatever you want. Just fix this. Whatever you want." The words he should have said years ago. The offer he was only making now because his own survival depended on it. He still didn't get it. He thought he could buy me back. That my integrity had a price tag. He was trying to offer me a gilded cage in the very prison he had built for me. I didn't reply to that one either. Silence was my most powerful weapon. His panic was feeding on my silence, growing more frantic with every unanswered message. He was fighting a war on 2 fronts. His cornerstone client had vanished. His other clients were in open revolt, and the architect who held all the institutional knowledge was a ghost. The final, beautiful act of this power shift came from Elena. She sent me a single photo with no caption. It was a picture of her desk, with a simple cardboard box on it, just like the one that had been waiting for me a week ago. She, along with 2 other senior drafters and one of our best structural engineers, had all walked into Gideon's office together and resigned, effective immediately. They were not just leaving Thorn Architecture, they were leaving Gideon. His firm was now a hollow shell. He had the fancy office, the new letterhead, the impressive-sounding name, but the talent, the relationships, the trust, the actual value of the company, had just walked out the door and was in the process of migrating to a small, quiet coffee shop, where an unemployed architect was sketching impossible buildings. He had staged a coup to seize a kingdom, only to find himself the king of an empty castle. His power had been an illusion, built on my work and my reputation, and as soon as he had severed me from the equation, the entire structure had collapsed. It wasn't about revenge, it was about gravity. The meeting was my idea. After 2 days of silence from my end, Gideon was unraveling. I had heard through the grapevine, which, in the architecture world, is a surprisingly efficient network of gossip, that he was already missing payroll. The exodus of clients and talent had triggered a financial death spiral. He was desperate, and a desperate man is a predictable one. He would have agreed to meet me anywhere. I chose the location with deliberate, symbolic intent, the empty lot where the Valerius Museum was supposed to stand. I arrived early. It was a vast, windswept plot of land overlooking the river, surrounded by a chain-link fence. A single, large sign stood near the entrance, a relic from a future that would never happen. It read, "Future Home of the Valerius Museum, a Thorn Architecture Project." The irony was so thick you could taste it. I stood in the center of the lot, the wind whipping my hair, and just looked at the city skyline. This was supposed to be my triumph. For a week it had been the site of my greatest humiliation. Now, it was the stage for my vindication. Gideon arrived exactly on time. He got out of his expensive car, but the confident swagger was gone. His suit, usually immaculate, looked rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and rage. He walked toward me, his steps heavy on the uneven ground. He started speaking before he was even close, his voice raspy. "Avery, you had to do it. You had to burn it all to the ground, didn't you?" I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. I let the accusation hang in the air between us. Everything we built, years of work, Gone. Because of your ego. Because you couldn't stand to see me succeed. I finally looked at him, my expression calm, my voice even. It wasn't about ego, Gideon. It was about a contract. A contract you never bothered to read. I held up the manila folder I was carrying. Inside was the addendum. He didn't need to see it. The damage was done. He let out a harsh, barking laugh. The contract. Don't you dare hide behind some legal technicality. This was a setup. That crazy old man, Sterling. You manipulated him. You went behind my back. I took a step closer, my voice dropping but losing none of its edge. No, Gideon. I did my job. I built a relationship with our client. A client you dismissed as an eccentric and blew off for a lunch meeting. You saw him as a wallet. I saw him as a partner in a vision. He saw the difference. That's all that happened. The addendum wasn't a trick. It was a consequence of your own neglect. His face contorted in a snarl. So what now? You think you've won? You have nothing. A one-woman shop with no capital. I still have the firm. I'll rebuild. I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. He was so blinded by his own narrative that he couldn't see the reality of his situation. I said, "What firm, Gideon? You have an office lease and a fancy logo. You have no projects. The Callaway Group pulled their contract yesterday. The Miller residence is gone. The foundation work is on hold. Your clients are gone. You have no senior staff. Elena, Marcus, and Chen resigned. I heard your best structural engineer went with them. Who are you going to rebuild with?" The color drained from his face. He hadn't realized how fast the news had traveled, how complete his isolation was. I delivered the final blow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just a statement of fact. They're not just gone, Gideon. They're with me. I founded a new firm, Vance Atelier. The Callaway Group signed with me this morning. The Millers are sending over their retainer tomorrow. Elena and the team start on Monday. We're taking a smaller office, but it's one we can afford. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The full scope of his defeat was finally dawning on him, not as a concept, but as a cold, hard reality. He hadn't just lost a project. He had lost an entire company that he never truly owned in the first place. He owned the name, but I had always owned the engine, and the engine had just been lifted out and placed in a new chassis. He finally whispered, "Why?" I thought about it for a moment. I could have listed 1,000 reasons. The stolen credit, the condescension, the public humiliations, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it all. But none of that mattered now. The past was just a prologue. What mattered was the new reality. I said, "You thought I was a stepping stone, Gideon. Someone you could use to get what you wanted, and then kick away. You were wrong. I'm not a stepping stone. I'm a cornerstone, and you just learned the difference." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of his empty, worthless field, under a sign that bore his name, but signified only his failure. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The confrontation wasn't about shouting him down. It was about showing him the blueprint of his own destruction, a blueprint he had unwittingly helped me draw. The new reality had been established, and I was its sole architect. It's been 6 months since that day. The sign at the Valerius lot, that once read "A Thorn Architecture Project," is gone, replaced by a new one. It reads "Future Home of the Valerius Museum, Design and Oversight by Vance Atelier." My name, my firm, standing proud against the city skyline. We broke ground 3 months ago, and every morning I walk the site, a hard hat on my head, and a deep, quiet satisfaction in my chest. Mr. Sterling has visited twice, walking the grounds with me in silence, a rare, knowing smile on his face. He doesn't need to say anything. The building itself is our conversation. Gideon's firm, Thorn Architecture, folded within a month. The vultures of the industry picked its bones clean. The fancy office was leased to another company. The name vanished from the directories. Gideon, I heard, left the city. Some say he's trying to get a junior position at a firm in another state, but his reputation preceded him. The story of his spectacular, self-inflicted implosion became a cautionary tale, whispered at industry mixers. He tried to take sole credit for a victory, and in doing so, he authored his own complete and utter defeat. He didn't just lose a project, he lost his career because he fundamentally misunderstood what our work is about. He thought it was about sales and image. He forgot that at its heart, it's about integrity. A building like a career cannot stand on a weak foundation. My new office, the home of Vance Atelier, is nothing like the old one. It's smaller, a bright, open-plan studio filled with light, models, and the energetic hum of a team that is passionate and collaborative. Elena is now a partner, her brilliance shining now that it's not being hidden under a bushel. We have more work than we can handle, from clients who came to us not because of a flashy brand, but because they wanted honest, dedicated architects. We are building a reputation for being the firm that listens, the firm that creates, the firm that delivers. The other day, a young woman, a new intern, was looking at the framed document I have hanging on my office wall. It's not a diploma or an award. It's the letter from Gideon's lawyer, the one that so coldly informed me of my termination. She asked me why I would frame something so negative. I told her it was a reminder that sometimes the end of one road is just the beginning of a highway you were always meant to be on. A reminder that your value isn't determined by those who choose to overlook you, but by the work you do and the integrity with which you do it. A reminder that it wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. I reclaimed my work, my name, and my future. So this is my story, and I'm telling it to you for a reason, because I know for a fact that I am not the only one who has ever been in this position. Maybe your Gideon was a boss who stole your idea. Maybe it was a company that took your loyalty for granted. Maybe you're the quiet one in the room right now, the one doing the real work while someone else takes the bows. If that's you, I want you to hear me. Your work has value. Your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like a ghost in your own machine. Sometimes, the structures we work in are flawed, broken, or built to benefit the wrong people. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can stay and fight a losing battle, or you can do what an architect does. You can build something new, build your own firm, build your own network, build your own future, lay your own foundation, and build a career so solid that no one can ever push you out of it. Your talent is your own. Your integrity is your fortress. Don't ever let anyone take that from you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it felt familiar, please do me a favor and hit that like button. It lets me know that these stories are worth telling. Leave a comment below and share your own experience. We build strength by sharing our stories. And if you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this video. You never know who might need to hear it today. Remember, be the architect of your own life. Don't just build your career, build it to last.